Power panel now. Jonathan Schanzer, former counterterrorism analyst at the Treasury Department. Michael O'Hanlon, foreign policy senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. Michael, I'll start with you. So we've just recently learned from this new interview with the president kind of the timing of things, and that in fact planes were not in the air, but it was a very close call. What does this communicate to Iran? And I almost want to say our enemies, because they are in a nexus. It's not just them.
Well, it's a good question. I'm not that worried about it. I think President Trump made it pretty clear that he was just about to pull the trigger, but for this particular incident, he held back. And our centerpiece of our strategy towards Iran right now, as you know, is economic, trying to intensify the economic pressure, maybe even slightly more than I would advocate. But in any case, that is the centerpiece, which means that Iran is the country that is using violence to try to change the economic dynamics here. And they may come back and use force again. And at that point, we may not have the option of withholding fire. But I think the president's indicated he was like, 99% of the way towards pulling the trigger and pull back. I have no issue with the way in which he's conducted his rhetoric or his preparations this week. But obviously, you can't keep holding back indefinitely if Iran escalates.
Well, and I had asked four-star Jack Keane on the program earlier whether or not this was a cancellation or a delay. He said at this point it looks like a cancellation because of those sanctions. And Senator Graham said yesterday severe pain inside that country because of sanctions. Jonathan, 39 years via proxy and sometimes altercations and confrontations that were not via proxy, just straight up Iran, and not the kind of retaliatory move that we saw put into motion almost. Are we in a position now to better say to Iran, we're serious?
Absolutely, and I think you're absolutely right in pointing out that we now have, basically 40 years of nonstop violence on the part of this regime. More than 600 Americans killed in action by Iran or its proxies, even during the Iraq and Afghanistan war. So we're certainly justified in responding in a kinetic response. I think that Michael's correct that what we have right now is an administration that probably sees an opportunity to work with the international community to further tighten those sanctions, to make Iran feel some more economic and political isolation. And let's just remember here, we are not on a timetable. We can decide to respond to Iranian aggression whenever we wish. And so that could happen today, tomorrow, next week, or next month.
House Armed Services Committee Chairman Adam Schiff said he didn't think it was the best decision for the president to take to Twitter this morning about why he called off those retaliatory strikes. Now, of course, since then, we know that we have obviously heard from him, but let's watch.
That's not the kind of thing that I think the president should say publicly. This is a decision that he should keep with his set. He should not be saying stuff like that publicly because it gives the impression of a level of indecision that I don't think is helpful to us. I wish he was more discreet about what he shared with everybody.
And please forgive me, it is Smith, not Schiff. Your response, Jonathan.
Look, I think there are a lot of people who take issue with the president's, shall we call it, unconventional style on Twitter. I think there are a lot of things that he could probably benefit from not sharing via Twitter. But certainly in this case, I think signaling to the Iranians that he's ready to fire upon them and that he made a decision last minute is not the end of the world. I think the Iranians have gotten the message. Now, the question is, at this point, whether they respond to the United States through this channel that has been opened with the country of Oman, or whether they continue with their aggression in the Gulf.
Michael, let's move forward now with this idea beyond Twitter and the president just sitting down moments ago with another network and saying, in fact, that the planes weren't in the air. How important is it for the American people to see and hear this much transparency at this point?
Well, I'm with Jonathan. I sort of like it in this situation, or at least I have no issue with it. I think that we do want to send, sort of a complex message here that we are not going to be indifferent to the use of violence against tanker traffic, other commercial traffic, or certainly our own military assets in the region. But we will also be careful in discriminating, and we will make our decisions about retaliation on a case-by-case basis, and as Jonathan said, at the time and place of our own choosing. I also think in the international campaign to apply economic pressure, again echoing Jonathan, we need to make it clear that we're trying to be the reasonable party here. And the administration's going for broke with a very intensive economics-first strategy. To get support for that after having pulled out of a nuclear deal that many countries were behind, we're going to have to seem like the reasonable party that's going the extra mile not to escalate this. So I actually like hearing the president's thought process. I think it actually reinforces our foreign policy effectiveness, at least in this case.
And Michael, you say we want to send a complex message. Jonathan, how much more complex does it get with our national security advisor on the ground next week, John Bolton, in Israel? What are we looking for there?
Well, it's going to be very interesting. I mean, I think it's also probably worth noting that we're seeing some interesting noises coming out of Germany and England, that they're perhaps leaning a little bit more toward the United States in their views of the way that Iran is acting in the region. That is moving things in the right direction. And now we'll have an opportunity to work with the Russians, to share with them, I think, the fact that Iran is increasingly isolated and that they need to work with us. And I think that's obviously something that John Bolton is going to share. And to be sure, the Israelis are going to share that as well.
Real quickly, does the cancellation of this kind of military action change that conversation then for all of those allies? Michael?
I think they know that we are capable of pulling the trigger if we so choose. The United States has been at war for 20 years, and we're fighting every day in one place or another.
Well,
so
look, I asked that because after we pulled out of that Iran deal, a lot of them didn't. You know, they were still doing business with Iran.
Right. And so the bigger issue here is persuading them that our strategy towards Iran is not just the Americans seeing blood whenever the word IRAN is mentioned, that we can actually be strategic and thoughtful. So I think this may help, not hurt, our ability to bring the allies along.
Michael O'Hanlon, Foreign Policy Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institute, and Jonathan Schanzer, former counterterrorism analyst at the Treasury Department. Great to see you both. Thank you for being part of the discussion today.